Can you hear me now? Oh my God. Okay, so apparently I had switched audio devices before I started up OBS the last time, so that's why the audio device was not showing up. So hopefully you can actually hear my voice. I can see people could hear the music, so yeah, there we go. Oh, sorry about that. And oh wow, it looks like the stream chat overlay is coming from the wrong stream. Oh, what fun it is to stream. Let's see. Chat widget. Let's see. Can I refresh this thing? I can't even move the box. I don't know, dude. Does it seem to be refreshing? Doesn't look like it. Who knows what's going on? Oh, there it is. I think it's good now. Yeah, I lost all the likes on the stream, so everybody re-like the stream. There was a lot of likes on the stream before, so thank you if you liked it, but actually re-like it. All right, so now I think everything is back together and we can actually get this going if my microphone doesn't start malfunctioning at the same time. So welcome to System Crafters Live. I'm David Wilson, and now we're back with the second version of the stream for today, where we're going to talk about the topic that I came up with for today, which is why geeks don't use geeks. That's not really the truth, but you know, you just need a snappy title. Happy New Year to you too, Marcel. And I'll say hello again to the people who are here. There's some people that didn't see last time. Technomog, Mr. Bill, Pavel, Daigo, Luis, Julian, Gon, Mark, Florent, Dude, Jurg, Anton. Yeah, and Case is there in the Twitch chat. So, I was saying, whenever I didn't realize the mic wasn't working last time, that I'm really happy that I was finally able to get a new System Crafters video out, because it's been like 2 months, almost 2.5 months even, since I posted the last video. And it's mainly been because it's been very difficult to try to record a video while being here, not with my normal streaming setup. I mean, I've been streaming, which, you know, is a miracle in itself, but it's been difficult to find a time to prepare videos. You know, streaming also requires preparation, but it requires less preparation than a video like the one I posted yesterday, which requires me to go and sit and try to make demos work and make them work correctly and be repeatable to where, you know, whenever I try to record the video, it doesn't completely fall in my face. So, yeah, very happy that the video came out, and also happy that people seem to be enjoying it and a lot of people are seeing it. So that's great. Now I got to try to drink my tea in a very strange configuration so I don't piss my mic off. Okay. So, whoops, why did I jump so far ahead? So let's start with updates. One thing you may be noticing today that's a little bit different, maybe you didn't notice yet, is I have a new panel set up here, which is actually tab bar mode. So one of the things I spent my time on earlier this week is customizing tab bar mode. As we talked about that, what was it, last week in the stream? I went a little bit further with that and actually was able to replace Polybar, which I was using before as my panel in Linux. And now this is all just regular Emacs tab bar mode. I'm using the new emoji functionality to put nice little emojis in the upper left corner, sort of like I was doing before with Polybar. Have the clock, the battery status, which I'm sort of stealing the segment from Dude Mode Line to put that here in this part of the thing. I also have this thing too, which I don't really need. Well, I'm not going to turn it on right now because it makes things a little bit weird, but there's the KeyCast setup where you can see which key I'm pressing and what the command is bound to. I actually do have it working up here as well. And that's really nice for streams or videos where I have to, explain what I'm doing and you have to see me do a lot of key bindings. But this is not going to be one of those streams, so I'm not going to turn it on. But I'm very happy with it so far, the tab bar setup. I think it's really cool. I've also gotten rid of perspective.el, which is something that I depended on quite a lot for a while. I've got a little bit of a hacky setup right now to replicate some of what I'm doing there, but I'm going to do some more work to make it better. I think I might be able to leverage Consult for that a lot, but we'll see how that goes. I'll give some updates on that as I figure it all out. Also, next week, I think I want to do a video on the Vertigo extensions. So there's been a set of extensions that have been added to Vertigo by Minad, Daniel Mindler, for a while now. They've been in a folder in the Vertigo package, but they haven't been accessible, as far as I can tell, to people who install the Vertigo package until recently. So now when you install Vertigo, there's actually extensions that you can just load up, but they're not turned on by default because the whole idea of Vertigo is to sort of be minimal and just do what is necessary. But there are certain pieces of functionality people kept asking for, so Daniel added them as extensions. And this week I'll try to do a video to cover some of them that I think might be useful. So we'll do some Vertigo stuff this week. Still a great package. I really enjoy using it. Let's see. Arnav says, I'm super excited for the Geek series. Yeah, me too. Let's see. Hello, Bill, Daniel, Arya, Victor, Mads, Alejandro, John. Gon says, is that Emacs 28? Yeah, I'm using Emacs 28. Tab bar was in Emacs 27 also, but I think there's new stuff that has been added that I'm making use of. I'm not sure which parts of it is, but definitely having Emacs 28 make that easier. Hi, Piotr. Nabarun says, Vertigo and Marginalia have been really useful. Yeah, definitely for me too. Hi, Rahul. GK Suda says, I just the other day switched back to vanilla Vertigo from Vertigo Flat and Vertigo Mouse. I would be interested to hear your experience with that because I haven't tried either of those yet. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting things there. I also saw Daniel and Prat and Andrew Tropin discussing some, taking some ideas from Prat's new MCT.el and implementing them in Vertigo somehow. So there's some good ideas that are sort of going around Vertigo right now, I think. Hi, Aurelio. Use Emacs 29. I haven't tried that yet. Gon says it's not available via Geeks install Emacs. No, Emacs 28 is not available yet because it's not fully released yet. Thomas, I wish I could change that color. I have no idea what dictates what the color is. Apparently if I refresh, let's see, if I refresh the chat widget, let's just do that again. It should actually refresh the colors. I don't know why it does some kind of random color selection, but it's really annoying to me. I wish I could just fix it to a particular color. Let's see if it shows back up. Somebody say something. It's still red. I don't know what it's doing. Sorry about that. Alexandru says, I think Geeks has an Emacs Next package. That's actually true. So Emacs Next, I don't know what it's focused on right now. In fact, let's actually check that. We can check it in the Geeks package here. Emacs Next. Emacs Next seems to be focused on Emacs 28, so that's possible. Let's see what it's using specifically. So yeah, I misspoke. Emacs Next does give you the Emacs 28, probably the release candidate, whatever is current on that, but it will not give you Emacs native comp. That's the reason why I use the Flat Watson channel for Emacs native comp with Emacs 28. John says Vertigo is a completion package, right? The thing about calling it a completion package, which I've called a completion package even back when I was making the video about Vertigo, it's more like a selection and filtering package or interface, I guess you could say. I mean, you do completions with it to some degree, but it's more about selecting items. So I'm trying to use the proper terminology now whenever I discuss that. Bill says, anyone besides me build from master? I'm running 29 here. Yeah, I'm sure plenty of people are building from master. I also heard Flat say that, or Flat Watson say he's planning on providing an Emacs 29, or possibly providing an Emacs 29 package in the Flat channel. So if you wanted to try that, that might come up soon. Okay, let's get started on the actual topic for the day, which is why geeks don't use Geeks. So yesterday I published a video titled 5 Reasons to Try Geeks in 2022 to try and encourage people to give Geeks a try this year. Mainly because there's been a lot of really cool stuff happening, new features being added that I think are really useful and interesting to people. So I thought it was a good opportunity to try and demonstrate some of these things and see if I could get people interested in giving it a shot. And at the end of the video, I asked viewers a couple of questions. The first being, what has kept you from using Geeks before? And the second is, if you've tried Geeks, what problems did you have? And I got a lot of feedback on the comments of the video. Some of them got lost to time because YouTube just keeps deleting comments for some stupid reason. But I'm actually surprised at how many it did not delete this time. Don't ask me why that happened, but it is what it is. And I wanted to pull together some of the recurring themes in the comments so we could discuss them and see if there's any ways we could either explain or mitigate these issues so that, you know, people who come looking for information about Geeks might find explanations for the things that they keep hearing about it. So, yeah, Ari has mentioned one of them there. Okay, so, the other thing I wanted to say is at any time, please feel free to give your thoughts and feedback on any of the issues we're talking about here, because I really do want to have your feedback as well. I've basically compiled the list of everything, and I'm going to write down my thoughts on it as we go, as we're speaking about it, and I'll also write down your ideas too. So first of all, getting started issues. So one thing that was said is that that Geeks has a high learning curve, so it's difficult to even know where to start in learning it. And honestly, I agree with that. I mean, it does have a high learning curve. And honestly, with all of the things that it can do and the way that it's implemented, of course, it's going to have a high learning curve, because this is not just, you know, put a file in the file system. There's a whole lot of machinery going on to facilitate configuring a system and placing the files where they need to be. And all other kinds of stuff, not even talking about how you configure it yet, you know, using a language for that. So I agree, there's definitely a high learning curve there, and there's not really a good answer to how to address that, aside from just more people writing their own understanding of Geeks so that other people can sort of learn how to think about Geeks. One of the biggest problems, I think, is how to conceptualize what's happening with Geeks so that you sort of know what to expect whenever you do certain things with Geeks, like how packages get installed, how profiles work, you know, how to actually write a configuration, system configuration, or even a home configuration. So, you know, more people need to share their experience and understanding. In my opinion, I think that the more people who are writing blog posts, making videos, or just even discussing it in community channels and whatnot, will make it easier for other people to pick it up. I've seen plenty of people learn a lot about Geeks by talking in the System Crafters Discord. So I know it's possible for this information to be transmitted, but at first glance, whenever you're looking at the Geeks homepage or you're looking at the manual, it seems like there's a lot of information to absorb. And frankly, it took me a long time to get ramped up on Geeks to the point where I felt like I could actually install it on a real computer and not just like a VM. So it is definitely, it has a high learning curve, and I want to try to do my part this year to help with that by trying to break down a lot of the stuff, maybe make some shorter videos on specific topics about Geeks to explain how it works, so that, yes, I know, thank you, Mr. Bill. So that, let me just go do something really quick. So that people can get started and understand the concepts and don't really feel like there's as much of a learning curve. It really just takes, you know, people trying to teach other people about that, I think. So I have to do one thing really quickly. I apologize for that. I don't know if I actually do this, if it's gonna start stuff over. I'll deal with that later. I'm not that worried about it. Okay. All right, so let's see what people in the chat are saying, actually. Arya says, Geeks docs are worse than NixOS. We'll talk about that in a second. I haven't actually looked at the NixOS docs in a while, but I know that since that project's been around for a while, and there's a lot of people who are using it, and a lot of... I don't know that this is the fact, but I think there's more money going into the Nix and NixOS projects because, it's probably more business friendly, I suppose, for using that as a server management tool, that it has more resources behind it. So really the best you can do if you want to help make Geeks manuals better or documentation better is to actually go contribute to it. Prashant says, poor hardware to build packages, lack of binary cache packages. That's actually a good point that I should mention in the hardware section. Thank you, Prashant. Happy New Year to you as well, Minas Mezar. Prashant says, Geeks docs are better in my opinion. So there's definitely some not necessarily agreement on that, but I can see both sides for sure. Nix options are a search engine, plus NixOS Wiki is really user-friendly. Yeah, definitely community resources may be a problem. Okay, so let me just check chat a little bit more, make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so hard to figure out how to install it and intimidating. So people think that it's intimidating to figure out how to install Geeks. And I also agree with that too. I mean, it is a little bit intimidating because I was intimidated at first. And part of why I made the video for how to install Geeks on your system is that I wanted to show how to do it. You watch me actually install it on my system from scratch, but also simplify the process because I know a lot of people are trying to install Geeks on modern computers, and often it's difficult to do that because you don't have access to Wi-Fi, or maybe your graphics driver or stuff like that doesn't work. So I feel like this is another area where more could be done, but I think the hardest part of figuring out how to install Geeks isn't necessarily the part about getting it to work or getting it to boot. It's more about understanding how to write a configuration for a Geek system, and until you've actually used Geeks, it's hard to figure that out. You can go and use the graphical installer and have it generate a configuration for you to start with based on your disk partitions and what your which partition your bootloader and stuff needs to be on. But I think that either there needs to be a very, very good explanation about how you should write a configuration and a lot of different aspects of it, or maybe even videos breaking it down. And I'm going to try to do a little bit of both of those things. So need to create better learning resources to teach how to write Geeks system configurations, because really I think that's the problem. I mean, booting it is the first problem, but knowing how to configure it is the real problem. John says, hard to figure out until you use it. That was my experience. Once I actually got it booted and needed to add the non-GNU repo to add the Linux kernel, it was actually not bad at all. Yeah, once you get it installed, then it's a bit easier to continue tweaking things because you actually have a working system. At least you have a basis to start with, and then you can start doing research on how to configure the various aspects of your system. One of the first things I had to figure out was, if I'm not using the GNOME desktop environment, how do I get, like, in i3, how can I control the backlight on my computer? And it turned out I had to go do some extra customization to add UDEV rules so that my user could change the backlight. And that part of my config is still actually there if you go look at it. So things like that, I think that's the part that's lacking from my own coverage of configuring your system with Geeks. It's like, okay, now that you've got Geeks installed, what are the other things that you're going to obviously have to figure out how to configure, and then how can I make that easier, or explain to you how it works, and also explain it in a general way so you understand how to solve other similar problems. Marcus says, can you run Geeks on a Raspberry Pi? I think so, but I haven't actually tried it. So someone else in the chat might be able to verify that, but I think it is possible. Benoit says, not being able to ask why my Wi-Fi card does not work. Yeah, we can talk about that too. Reading the manual can be difficult. So the manual can be a little bit overwhelming. That's true. So the manual can be a little overwhelming. So someone said in the chat earlier, let me see if I can find that now. Let's see, something about GNU docs. Yeah, I missed that comment. Anyway, the Geeks manual is, I think, is well written and it has a lot of information in it. But the problem with manuals is that if you just go purely from a reference standpoint and you don't go sort of step by step through the process of how to do something, then you're leaving the reader to have to piece together that information themselves. And I'm not saying that Geeks is guilty of that, but I see it a lot in manuals like the Emacs manual, even the Geeks manual, other GNU project manuals. They're very technical and they describe all the aspects of the system and all of the options you have available to you, but they're really missing some level of conceptual documentation that sort of takes a step back and says, okay, so now we've given you all this information about how the software works. Now here's how you apply it. So what I'm doing on this channel a lot of times is just that part of it. How do you apply these things? How do you take the pieces that you have available to you and put them together in a way that actually works well? And that's definitely been missing for Emacs for a long time. I think Geeks has a similar problem where there's just an overwhelming amount of information in that one manual. And if you don't understand how Geeks works, or you're not really comfortable with Scheme, then it's even more daunting, I think. So I think that there need to be more conceptual usage documentation. Now, there is the Geeks cookbook, and that actually is fairly helpful, but also it is not fleshed out very much yet. If you haven't seen the Geeks cookbook yet, it's like an alternative manual on the documentation site. Yes, thank you for asking me about this. If you go to GNU Geeks cookbook, we can go entirely on one page and you'll see like, oh wow, why is it in German? Okay, let's go to the EN, US? No, come on. Why am I getting the German cookbook? I'm not in Germany. Documentation. Now I'm getting myself into problems here. Let's go back to this page. I clicked the wrong link. So somebody tell me that I'm stupid. Okay, so entirely on one page. Here we are. So there's not a whole lot in here, which would be nice if there was more stuff in here. System configuration, advanced package management. There is some really key things in here though, like advanced package management. Geeks Profiles in Practice, I think, started off as a blog post by Ambervar. And that's actually how I learned about how to deal with multiple profiles at the same time. And I haven't talked about that yet on the channel, and I might not, because Geeks Home sort of takes the place of that. But definitely it's something you need to know if you want to have a little bit more of an advanced knowledge of Geeks. So I'm going to put a link to the cookbook in the show notes here, because I think it's a good resource if you haven't seen it yet. Let's drop that in. All right. Let's see. Technomog says, I would like a site that kind of has side-by-side view of typical apt-get or whatever command on the left and corresponding Geeks guile block on the right with some explanations. That could be useful. A site that tells you how to do common things in Geeks like in other Linux distros. or a site, or let's say a resource. Ashra says, GNU Jeans is an advanced pants management system. If that's what it actually said in German, I'll be very impressed. So, yes, reading the manual can be difficult, and I think that the maintainers of Geeks would be very happy to hear any feedback people have on how to make the manual better, and especially if you are trying to give, contributions to the manual itself. But I think for everyone, or every person is going to interpret the manual differently. Some people are going to have no problem, finding their way through it and learning how to do things. Other people are going to have more problems. So that's where the sort of community aspect of the Geeks community or even the System Crafters community comes into play, where you can go ask questions and try to figure out how to do the things you need to do. So community is a big aspect on how people can learn things. Aria says that the Nix wiki has that thing where it tells you how to do common things in Nix like in other Geeks distros, Linux distros. So that's kind of a useful thing. If someone puts something like that together, that could either go somewhere for Geeks or it could go on the System Crafters wiki, which is currently sort of broken if you've noticed. So that's something that people could definitely produce. It could be a really nice community effort to put that together, I think. There should be GUI tools to configure it. So configuring your system with a graphical interface for Geeks, I don't think is going to be quite as doable. I mean, for common stuff like setting your host name, setting your locale, your keyboard layout, disk partitioning, what packages get installed, and basic service configuration, all of that could definitely be done. But I don't know that it's worth it. I really feel like if you're going to use a distro or a system like Geeks, it's better if you actually learn how to configure it with code. I feel the same way about Emacs as well. Like there's a configuration system that has the whole UI that you can use for configuring Emacs, but if you're the type of person who actually is going to invest time in learning a tool like this, you are going to be much better served if you learn how to write the code itself. So, I don't really agree with that. But the thing is, it's hard to write Scheme if you don't have good tools. So many people who try Geeks are already enthusiasts of either Lisp or Emacs. So it's easy for them to just pull up Emacs and then try to write code that has a lot of parentheses in it because it's S expressions or just, general Lisp or Scheme code. But for people who don't use Emacs or have never written a Lisp before, it does seem a lot harder to write a configuration because half the time you're dealing with the fact that you have unmatched parentheses or maybe you didn't group things correctly and the compiler is yelling at you and it doesn't actually give you very helpful error messages. So one thing I actually did have a lot of trouble with, or I still have trouble with every now and then, is when I make any changes to a configuration file and all of a sudden when I try to apply the config, I get very, very cryptic errors about what's wrong. And I have to go load up the package or the module where the code is inside of the Geeks REPL. And then finally I can start to get more information about what's happening. So that part makes things a lot more difficult. But one thing I had a thought of earlier is it possible to write a very user-friendly Lisp editor that is single purpose for writing Geeks config? Yeah, just for Geeks config. Because, there's other programs that can be configured with a Lisp, but I think the more likely scenario is that someone's going to try Geeks rather than, other things. Maybe Nix could be useful, I guess, if you had a very user-friendly Lisp editor. When I say user-friendly, I'm actually talking about it should almost be point and click where you could drag things around and it would just put the whole S expression in the right place. And you would never have to worry about unbalanced parentheses because it would always put them in for you. So I think there's some ways that you could actually make a very user-friendly Lisp editor, but it would not be something that a power user would want to use, but it would be something that a person let's say a researcher who decides to use GNU Geeks to do reproducible research. This is actually a thing that some people in the Geeks maintainer team are trying to promote with the Geeks HPC website. So if you go to geekshpc.org, I think. Well, let's just look for Geeks HPC. They have a Twitter account, but there's a real website that's attached to it. So let's see. Come on. Yeah, hpc.geeks.info. So this is a site that's basically talking about how people can use Geeks for high-performance computing and basically research applications. Now, a lot of people who are doing high-performance computing probably have some background writing code, but if you want to tell an average researcher who doesn't really write code for a living to use a Lisp to configure a system because it has such great benefits, I think it's going to be a harder thing to accomplish because it's hard to write Lisp code. So, or it's hard to write Lisp code if you don't have a good editor to help you with it. So some kind of tool that would help to actually write that Lisp code could be a good idea, I think. Okay, let me scroll up a little bit and see what I'm missing in the chat. There's a lot of German discussion here now. I'm glad that we were able to trigger that. Pavel says, maybe I should explore Nix if it could do everything Geeks can with the exception of Lisp. Yeah, I don't know. Are you being serious or sarcastic? Pedro says, I know it's off topic, but what is the main difference between NixOS and Geeks? Well, the number one difference is they use a different language for configuration, but there's other differences too that we don't really have time to get into right now. Gon says it's always better for comprehension to use the command line than clickety-clicking in GUIs, and it's also a lot easier to make things reproducible. I think that another aspect of this is that if you are using Geeks for the reproducibility properties, using a GUI to configure something that's supposed to be reproducible is sort of antithetical to that, even though they would get a configuration file out the other side of it. Pavel was serious. Nix seems to have some somewhat more stuff available, more packages, services, etc. As I have to install certain things from Nix on Geeks, I've thought about just trying Nix. Eric says, where can I find your tab bar config? I'll send it to you after the stream. Let's see. Okay. Mark says, there's a nice editor for Scheme called Dr. Racket, but it seems that it doesn't work with Guile Scheme. Yeah, the Racket tool set is pretty good, I think. Okay. So that's it for the sort of getting started section. The next issue, or the next set of issues, is software issues. Windows better? No thanks. So first of all, it doesn't have software that I need, and it's hard to write packages. Maybe I should have set that as two different things, but Geeks doesn't have as much software packaged as other distributions. But that's where you come in. So Geeks definitely does not have as much software available as other Linux distributions. If you're coming from something like, let's say, Arch Linux, where you have the R with all kinds of software that's packaged, or not even packaged, you could build it easily. Even Arch Linux itself, its own repository, has quite a lot of software. The reason why Geeks doesn't have as much software package, I guess there's two reasons. One is that there is definitely a barrier to entry to people trying Geeks because of various issues we're going to talk about in this stream. So you don't have as many people who are coming in to actually try to help with packaging software. However, the flip side of that is that I find that it's the only time I've actually been motivated to try to package a piece of software for a Linux distribution. I've used many different Linux distributions over the years, and Geeks was the first time I actually felt motivated to contribute a package definition to the maintainers. And I have actually contributed, I don't know, 3 or 4 packages. I can't remember how many at this point. And I've written others of my own that I haven't contributed yet. But as a Geeks user, it will be a necessity at some point for you to package some piece of software, and you have to kind of get comfortable with that idea. But I feel like if you're using Geeks, you should get comfortable with the idea of hacking it anyway, learning how to write code for Geeks because it's going to give you way more power in what you can do. It took me a long time to warm up to that idea because it is a little bit daunting to try to figure out how Geeks the system works, you know, especially how the code is organized, how to contribute to certain parts of the code. But it's sort of like Emacs in that the more you start to chip away at your understanding and start to get involved in the code, the easier it all becomes, and then you can actually start to do more contributions. So I think that Geeks has a similar ramp like Emacs does, where users of Geeks can eventually become contributors because you have to learn how to be self-sufficient to some degree to be successful. So the lack of software in some cases is a motivator to get you to learn more about Geeks. So I think that there is a positive effect there, even though it is a bit of a problem. Now, you can get software from other places. Channels, Nix, and Flatpak are the places where I get other software that I need. So other Geeks channels, Nix, and Flatpak. So did you know that you can install Steam on Geeks? And it doesn't require Flatpak to do that. There's actually a Steam package in the non-Geeks Geeks channel. There's also a Geeks gaming channel that is, I don't know how maintained it is. It probably is actually being maintained. And you can install the binaries for certain games that you would buy on stores like Good Old Games or other stores, so that they can actually run natively on Geeks. Now, it doesn't come with all of the files that you need to play the game. It just comes with, you know, like it downloads the files, makes them runnable in Geeks, and then you actually have to have the assets for the game yourself from a purchased copy. But you can get software that's not a part of the actual main Geeks package repository. You just have to know how to do it. So that's another thing we need to talk about on this channel, is the other options you have for how to install software. Flatpak is a very obvious choice for installing things that can't go in Geeks, like things like Discord or Slack or other complex applications that have extensions that are hard to pull into the Geeks code base. OBS is one of them. There's probably others that I'm not really thinking of right now, but OBS is one that's been a problem for me, that I've actually had to install it from Flatpak to get all the functionality that I need. And then there's Nix. The reason why you can use Nix is because Nix is similar to Geeks in that it has its own little place on the file system where it installs everything. So if you install Nix on Geeks, which is perfectly possible right now, you can use Nix to install certain packages that you need. So certain development tools that I need, like newer versions of Node.js or the .NET framework or things like that, you can install Nix and get those things and have similar functionality to installing and managing the packages as you would with Geeks. So you might have other places where you can get software from, but I would say in many cases it's better to try to learn how to package software for Geeks if there's something that you want to use regularly, because you're going to lose some of the benefits of Geeks if certain parts of what you use have to come from somewhere else. So for me, the fact that I use a few applications from Flatpak makes it so that whenever I install a new system or update a system with Geeks, I have to go manually update or install the software from Flatpak, and I don't like that. I would rather just rather be able to pull everything from Geeks and just have everything be completely reproducible every time I sync my configuration or install Geeks on another machine. So there are downsides to it, but if you really need a piece of software, you can get it if you need to. App images. I feel like I tried to run an app image one time and it didn't work. I mean, app images have, in theory, everything needed to execute with the dependencies of the application, but I think that at the very lowest level, you have to have the Linux dynamic library accessible in the normal location on the computer, and Geeks does not have that, if I'm not mistaken. I think that app images will not run because of that reason. And you can verify that by downloading an app image and using the LDD program to see which dynamic libraries it's looking for, and you'll probably find that one is missing. I could be wrong about that. That situation may have changed, but I feel like that's what happened when I tried it in the past. App image is great on other systems though, because you basically just download a file and execute it, and it's a whole app. So that's pretty cool. Check in the chat real quick. John says a simple packaging video would be amazing. I tried following this tutorial in the Geeks manual or blog and got stuck. Yeah, we need to cover packaging for sure. And it's even something where there are very advanced ways to deal with packaging, and it gets really complicated, I think. If you go, one of the things you really should do if you want to learn packaging, which is what I did actually, is go look at package definitions in the actual Geeks repository and look at how they do things. A lot of times you can find a similar application to the one that you're trying to package, and you can learn a lot of tricks on how to customize the build for that package to make it work correctly. I want to sort of shortcut that whole process by either going through and looking at Geeks packages and maybe explaining what they're doing, or trying to replicate a couple of existing packages, writing them from scratch to try to show how that process works. I haven't really fully thought about how to do that yet, but it is what I want to do. I want to help people learn how to package software correctly. Bakazinski says, I think Geeks takes too much effort to learn and has no application in enterprise environment. That's why IT professionals don't use it. I think that Geeks is not the distro for IT professionals. I think Geeks is a distro for the same kind of person that Emacs is for. A person who is an enthusiast of computer configuration to the extent that they want to do a lot of things themselves, and they also have an affinity to Lisp languages. I think that if you're not one of those people, it's going to be not so interesting to you. So I don't really see a lot of people trying to use Geeks in enterprise. However, if it was me running my own business, I would absolutely use Geeks because I would have full control over everything. So it really just depends on who it is. Whenever you're talking about, enterprise or businesses won't use Geeks. For me, technically speaking, I am a business, so I am going to use Geeks for my own stuff that I need it for. There's a few projects I have this year that we're going to talk about on this channel that are going to take Geeks and use it to build something. So yeah, for sure. Common IT shops are not going to use Geeks. It's more likely they will use Nix, and that's totally fine because Geeks is not really meant for that user base. Now, people in the Geeks maintainer team may tell you, oh, we would love for IT shops to use Geeks as well. That would be great, but I don't think that Geeks is appealing to average IT shops as it is to people like us who are sitting here watching this stream right now. Let's see. A lot of stuff in the chat, which is great, but it's hard for me to follow it. Luis says, I think you should do a video about contributing packages to Geeks. I have some packages on my channel I wanted to move to Geeks proper, but I didn't exactly understand how it works. Yeah, Geeks is another project that uses a patch and email workflow for contributions. It's actually not that hard. That was the first place I actually did the email patch workflow. So we should talk about that at some point because it has general utility to contributing to Emacs, contributing to Geeks, contributing to any project that's on SourceHut. So we need to do a general video on that whole process for sure. Baksinski says, I consider myself an IT professional and I use Emacs. Yeah, I don't say IT professionals in general don't care about Geeks. But I guess what you're saying is you don't really consider yourself interested in Geeks and you're an IT professional. So either way, I do think it's sort of a specific subset of the population who would be interested in Geeks. But, if people who are finding this channel probably do fall into that category. Gavin says, Geeks is a distro for tinkerers. Here are plenty of companies trying Nix. On the other hand, Geeks doesn't really differentiate itself. Yeah, it's definitely a distro for tinkerers. I agree with that. Just like Emacs is an editor for tinkerers. Aniket says, when are we having a stream with Prot? Yeah, I failed to get that scheduled this week, so we'll have to look into that next week. I'm doing too many things at the same time, if you haven't noticed. Okay, so we will cover how to write and contribute Geeks packages on the channel this year. So that's the last thing we can say about that. Can't dual boot with Windows. This is actually a problem, I think. I haven't tried to do it yet, but I cannot find any information anywhere about how to do it. Now, it is possible to dual boot with Windows. It's just not the way that you think is possible, because I do dual boot Geeks with Windows, but you just can't have them in the same grub menu. So it is possible. just not with Grub. Use your system's FE bootloader. I don't know if it's really a bootloader, but there's a way, if you, in many computers, you can actually, at the system level, say which distribution you want to, or which operating system you want to load, which is basically what I do. Gon asks a good question, though. Does it go with WSL2? It is possible to install Geeks in WSL2. MiniKN, which is a member of the System Correctors community, actually came up with a way to do that, and it is on the System Correctors wiki. Yeah, I'm gonna have to skip this warning because GitHub broke the SSL certificate. Oh, and the website's also broken too because I never fixed that particular issue. Great. There is information on the wiki. Let's go to the wiki site repo, and you can find it there, I think. Content. What was it? Geeks WSL. So go check out this little post here. It will tell you how you can set up Geeks on WSL. So if you have to use Windows and you like using WSL, you can set up Geeks on WSL too. So yeah, it isn't possible, as far as I know, to set up Windows as an option in the Grub configuration, the bootloader configuration for Geeks, but there's other ways to get back into Windows, so not really a problem, but it is sort of a thing that people get confused by, I think, whenever they start looking into Geeks, if they have to use Windows also. Hey, Mjolnir. Alexandru says, you can do Windows plus Geeks dual boot from Grub, but you have to write the Grub config yourself. Maybe there's some options in config.scm. So, says it's possible to write the bootloader config yourself to boot. You know, if that is possible, someone should just make it a reusable piece of code and put it in a channel so that people can grab it. Thanks for joining, Bill. Thanks. We'll see you next week. Luis says, is it possible to enter other Linux distros on Geeks' Grub? I dual boot Geeks with Arch and couldn't do it. It should be possible, but I haven't actually had to do it because I don't dual boot with other Linux distros. So I'm sure it is possible, though. It must be. It's still Grub, so you just have to point it the right place. All right. I need to customize a package, but I'm not sure how to do it. So this is sort of a corollary to the previous point where they don't know how to package software, but sometimes there's software like Suckless tools where you need to apply patches or add compiler flags. This actually is, there's ways to do this in Geeks, it's just they're not obvious to people. One approach is to write a package that inherits from the original package and changes only the different parts. So you can do this, and you'll see it a lot in the actual Geeks package repository. If you look at the package configs, there's a lot of times where you'll have a core package for something, like let's say a Guile library, and then you'll have a package that inherits from it and maybe changes the version of the package or the branch from where the package is built or the dependencies for that package, etc. So there is this inheritance concept for packages in Geeks where you can inherit from an existing package and then tweak settings of it. So that's one thing you could possibly do for things like the Suckless tools. You can get very far doing that. If you check in your customized packages to your own .files repository or maybe your own custom Geeks channel, it's very easy to pull that stuff into your own Geeks configuration. If you look at mine, I have a channel list here that has a few things in it. And one of them is my own channel, which is this Channel X channel, which is basically just my own set of packages that I've got there. But more recently, I've started putting my packages in my .files folder. and treating it as its own Geeks module. So I can have this packages folder and have various things here that I want to pull into my dot files. It does sort of change how you invoke Geeks to do that, but it is possible to have your own customized packages that you pull in yourself, and you don't have to contribute those back to Geeks. So you can load your own customized packages from your own Geeks channel, or even your dot files repository. You just have to set the load path correctly. So it is possible to do that. It's just something that you have to be taught how to do or learn by looking at other Geeks packages. Mason says this is pretty much how it's done in Nix as well. Yeah, I've seen that too, where you have packages that inherit from another package and just tweak certain things. So it's a good way to deal with the problem, I think, because you don't have to rewrite the package or copy the whole code of the package to change it. You just change the parts that you need. Raina says, you got me wanting to retry Geeks. I feel much more experienced now, so I might try VM first. That's a good thing to do, I think. All right, so next, it's hard to find configurations for very recent and very alpha or alpha software. So if you want to use very bleeding edge things, often you won't find packages for it. And that's going to be a problem anywhere, really, because any new piece of software, all the distributions that want to pick it up have to have somebody there who's wanting to use it and then contributes a package for it. Now, it may take longer for Geeks for new things to show up because maybe it's like a Go library or a Python library, and there's not as much people working with that type of library in Geeks. So you may have to go roll up your sleeves and do it yourself. But it is a problem whenever there's new software that hasn't been packaged yet. But the same solutions apply as what we were talking about before. It's just, you kind of have to get in there and try to make it yourself. As far as configurations are concerned, like there's some piece of software that's new. Like let's say, for instance, there's an IRC bouncer called Soju that is written by one of the people who works at SourceHut. And it seems a lot more straightforward to use than ZNC. It's not in Geeks yet, as far as I know. Let's actually check that. Yes, it's not in Geeks. So this is something that I would have to write myself. And not only do I have to package the piece of software, I have to write the service configuration so that you can launch and configure the settings for this IRC program, this IRC bouncer program. And that is even another level of difficulty on top of just packaging the software. So I can see why that would be a barrier to people who need to try certain pieces of software. So let me just say this is even harder when you need to set up services, etc. But the same solution applies. Learn how to do it and contribute it. Okay, let's move on to the next part. Hardware issues. And this is probably something that a lot of you have seen if you've tried Geeks before. One complaint is my basic hardware isn't compatible. No Wi-Fi, black screen at boot. Hey, Nicholas. So this is definitely a problem. And it's why I made my installation video and the special installer image. So if you did not see my video on installing Geeks as a full Linux system, I basically made my own GitHub repo that builds the Geeks installer with all of the stuff included that you need to boot on most systems. So let's talk about why that's necessary. So Geeks is a free software Linux distribution that falls under the FSDG guidelines. Yeah, Free System Distribution Guidelines, that's what it's called. So basically, this is a set of guidelines for distributions that want to consider themselves a free system distribution. And one of the parts there is that there shouldn't be any proprietary software or even any proprietary firmware blobs with the Linux kernel that are for certain pieces of hardware that have been contributed by vendors and are necessary for booting systems like, let's say, a laptop that has Intel Wi-Fi cards or any other type of Wi-Fi card. Let's see, Geeks follows the free system distribution guidelines. So because Geeks is a GNU project and it is being faithful to the GNU vision of software freedom, and they follow the free system distribution guidelines, they cannot allow anything that's proprietary to be checked into or be made part of the Geeks package distribution or any of the kernel pieces that come with it. So this is why when you boot Geeks on a modern laptop, you can probably get it to boot unless you have a hybrid graphics chipset, you get some issue there. But Wi-Fi doesn't work. And if you don't have an Ethernet jack on your laptop and you don't have an Ethernet dongle that you can plug in, then you have no internet. And that makes it very difficult to install Geeks because it needs to install packages from the internet. So this is an issue for many people. It was actually an issue for me the first time I actually tried Geeks. I wanted to install Geeks. I didn't really know much about it. I tried to boot it up, and then I didn't have Wi-Fi access, so I couldn't really get very far in the installer. Same thing for Debian, I think, too. I think by default, Debian follows the FSDG, and you have to do something for that to get an image that has the necessary drivers you need. So the way to deal with this, and this is something that the people who maintain Geeks will not tell you because I think that they don't want to violate the FSDG. I don't know for sure, but I think they don't want to violate the FSDG by recommending to do this. But there are other Geeks channels that have the full Linux kernel and also extra drivers for various different systems. The main one being the non-Geeks channel. The full Linux kernel and other hardware drivers, and a lot of other proprietary software too that you might want. So that is the number one option for getting unblocked if you need to install Geeks on your system and some part of your hardware doesn't work. One nice thing that I wanted to mention that I just found out about this week is that the non-Geeks repository now actually has its own substitute server, which is great because you don't have to compile the Linux kernel yourself anymore every time you upgrade it. That was kind of a problem in the past, where if you wanted to use the non-Geeks packages, you had to compile Linux because there was no substitute server that gave you the binary for that already. But the non-Geeks repo now does exist, so you can do that. And if you want to find out more about that, you can go to the non-Geeks GitLab repository, and there's a section. You have to search for it because I haven't found a way to link down to it yet. But no, not that one. There's a section in the README called substitutes for non-Geeks, and it will tell you how to set that up. So if you do this, then a lot of the stuff that you need that you have to use for a modern system, like the full Linux kernel, can be installed as a binary and not have to be built every time that you pull it down. So it's really good. This is a very new development, and it's great to see there's actually an official server now, because that means that more people can start using non-Geeks and be successful setting up Geeks. So let's see, check out their new substitute server. So yeah, hardware compatibility is a problem, but basically once you start getting your system online and get past that hurdle, then it's very repeatable to install your system or even get it to work on other systems. I haven't had any issues after I've finally figured out how to use non-Geeks correctly, and that was a couple years ago, probably 2019 by now. So it is definitely doable. It just takes a couple extra steps, and that's sort of what I had to teach people how to do in the installation video. But we'll go into more detail about that whole aspect of Geeks in other videos this year, I think. Okay, another thing here is that it's not easy to install drivers for graphics cards, and that is true. I've had issues trying to install the NVIDIA drivers. The non-Geeks repo has AMD and NVIDIA driver packages, but your mileage may vary. So basically, you may not be able to get them to work correctly. I didn't get them to work, but I also didn't try very hard, because the last time I tried on my ThinkPad X1 Extreme, I tried to set a BIOS setting to turn on discrete graphics, and it bricked my motherboard. I don't know if you remember that whole debacle a few months back. But you may have trouble with it, or you may not have trouble with it. So we'd be very interested to hear back from people who try to use these driver packages from the 9geeks repo to see if it actually worked for you. I'm hoping that whenever I build a desktop PC, I'll have a lot of luck with getting an actual 3D accelerated graphics card, a real one, to work, because I would like to use it for things like rendering videos, playing games, etc. I haven't had that functionality on Geeks for a while, so it would be nice to have. Eric says Debian is pretty much the same when it comes to drivers. Nicholas says, can confirm it takes knowledge and stubbornness to find the right part of the Debian site to get to the non-free firmware. Yeah, I found that too whenever I tried to install Debian. Debian is a great distro, but it is a little bit hard to get started with that one too. Gon says, Debian is extreme. The Emacs dock has its own package, Emacs Common non-FDSG or FSDG. Yeah, I heard about that. That seems kind of weird. What is it? Oh, the DFSG. So it's a different thing. DFSG Debian. DFSG licenses. Okay, so they got their own take on this. I wonder if it's even more extreme. Who knows? Haven't really looked at that one yet, though. Let's see. Nicholas says, if we're using the 9geeks channel, do we automatically get the substitutes, or it needs config? It does need configuration, because substitute server configurations are actually a different part of the Geeks system config. If you look at my configuration, it's out of date right now, so you shouldn't use it as your, well, my config is harder to find because I have it in a branch right now. If you go to my .files repo, look at the Geeks home branch, you can look at the davidwill/systems/base.scm file, and you can find that part in the My Desktop Services. I'm configuring the Geeks service type, changing the Geeks configuration to add another substitute URL. This is the old substitute server for non-Geeks, but if you change this to the new one, and also make sure to include the public key for that in this similar type of style here, you can basically include the public key directly in the code. If you do that, and then you do another Geeks system reconfigure, then after that, the next time you do Geeks pull, it should start pulling down substitute information so that you can install things like the Linux kernel without having to compile it. So it is possible to do that. It just takes a little bit of extra work. Let's see. Technomox says, I have a 2012 MacBook Pro collecting dust. What's the likelihood of getting Geeks to work on such a machine? Very likely, I would say. Whenever I was installing Nix back in 2014, I had a 2012 MacBook Pro, and that worked fine. You just need a kernel that supports the stuff, which you can get from non-Geeks. So I think that Geeks would install just fine on a 2012 era MacBook Pro. Very, very recent MacBook Pros, I think it won't work, but I think that there's constantly work being done to support newer MacBook Pros. The latest ones that have the new architecture, I don't know how that's going right now, but I think people are trying to work on that for Linux in general. Jordan says, I have to use NVIDIA for machine learning. CUDA really helped everyone leverage graphics cards for computing purposes. I wish it wasn't the case and OpenCL was more developed so we could use AMD cards. Yeah, definitely. Luis has a good question. Talking about adding substitutes in URLs, in my experience, Geeks Weather and some other similar commands don't seem to use the additional URLs. Does anyone else have this problem? I think I've seen that too, but I don't remember if there's a way to fix it. David says, I've got Geeks running on a late 2013 MacBook Pro, but I still haven't resolved issues with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Okay, well, that's a pretty big problem, I would say, unless you can just keep it plugged in all the time. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Anything else to say here? Probably not. Okay, programming language issues. So there were a few comments I saw where people were basically talking about the fact that Scheme or Lisp scare them. Basically, they're not sure if they are able to learn how to write Scheme and Lisp. I wonder if is it that the parentheses are just really confusing to look at. I don't know why people find Scheme or Lisp scary unless they just don't have as much experience, with programming languages in general. I personally find that Lisps are easier to use in other languages because of the regularity of the syntax, and that you're dealing with a language where everything's basically an object, and it's garbage collected language. You don't have to worry about allocation. You just start doing stuff in the language, and things just work. Though sometimes the problem with Lisps is that you don't really know what or how to accomplish specific tasks, because they generally have different terminology for certain things. So like in Scheme, you have ports when it comes to writing to files and stuff. You don't really know what a port is. I don't know if that really shows up, that terminology shows up in Geeks, but in general, I think that, there's things about Lisps that might make them a little bit alien compared to other programming languages, but I think that, that's sort of a misconception that people might have that they could deal with if they just sat down and tried to learn it. Obviously, I want to help with that. I have a plan to make a video basically that's, a crash course on Guile for Geeks users, where I teach you how to write Guile Scheme, specifically for the purpose of how to configure your system. So we're going to focus on the features that are used in Geeks so that when you see things, you'll understand how they work and what you can do with them. I think that should be pretty helpful. We'll have a Guile crash course for Geeks users on the channel soon-ish. BONK, I guess, is bonk. To be honest, knowing Guile enriches your Geeks experience but isn't really needed. It isn't really needed at first, but if you have to do anything more complicated, you're going to get really lost if you don't know a little bit about Guile or Lisp, I think, because, there's a lot of places where you have to use symbols for things, or you have to use the list function to create a list in line somewhere, or you have to use some other kind of filtering functions to take things out. And even Geeks itself, the way it uses Guile, it has some peculiarities to its own syntax that are even an experienced Scheme person might not know what is happening at first. And part of the reason for that is because in Scheme, you can define custom syntax in the language, and the rules for how those things get evaluated is not obvious from looking at it. And if you look at the syntax for like the operating system object you're just using to describe your whole system, that whole thing's got syntax built into it. So it is a bit different than just plain old Scheme. So there's a lot of different angles to this, I think. Oh yeah, so MouseX from Twitch says the G expression stuff, if you need to deal with package, can be a little hard. G expressions look really freaky. Let me pull up my home configuration just for a simple example of a G expression. Let's see, home services, desktop. This is another thing that was in the video yesterday. So if you're looking at this home desktop shepherd services function, and you're looking at how to define a shepherd service, all of a sudden you've got this weird # tilde syntax here, and you're looking at that and you're like, what is this? It doesn't make any sense. It looks ugly sort of compared to what you normally see in Lisp. So why do I have to do that? Well, this is a G expression, which is a special thing in Geeks where you're sort of encoding the instructions for how something should be configured. And this line does not get executed on it doesn't get executed in this code. It actually gets executed in the build server. So what you're doing here is building expressions that get sent to the build server for evaluation. And there's specific rules to how these things get evaluated so that you can do things like insert information about packages that you've installed. So in this case, we have this make fork exec constructor. It's a whole expression that's going to get sent to the build system to use to configure a shepherd service. And here we have this other little syntax, the $, where we're going to evaluate this code right here on this system, I think, where we're appending a path to the Pipewire package. So this is actually a reference to the Pipewire package, and we're appending a path to it. And basically what this does is say, I want to get the path to where the Pipewire package is installed in the Geeks store, or the GNU store, and then append this path to the end of it. And that gets used for launching the actual location of the Pipewire process on your system. So it is more complicated. It is understandable. You just have to get through the weird looking syntax first and understand what's happening. Bonk says G expressions are S expressions with bonuses. Yeah, I guess that's one way to say it. See ya, Eric. Thanks for coming. Let's see. Okay. Back to the slides. Yeah, so Scheme and Lisp can be scary, but they're learnable. You shouldn't be afraid of them. I don't want to learn another programming language. Well, if you don't want to learn Scheme, then you're probably not going to be trying Geeks anytime soon, I guess. So this person who doesn't want to learn Scheme, some of the people I saw talking about this were saying that, you know, nobody uses Lisp for, you know, actual jobs and whatnot, which is not true really. But the fact is it's not really like a mainstream language by any case. So I think there's certain people who think, I don't want to spend my time learning a language that has no other utility to me except for just configuring this thing. I can sort of understand that, but at the same time, you know, if you're a computer enthusiast and you're considering a tool like Geeks, you're probably the type of person who will be willing to spend the time to learn a language because you're curious about these things. So I think this is the basic barrier to entry for Geeks. But you can say the same thing for Emacs as well. If you don't want to learn Lisp, I mean, you could definitely get pretty far in Emacs without learning Emacs Lisp at all, because you can use the customization interface to configure a lot of stuff. But I feel like, you know, Emacs users and Geeks users are a self-selected group of people who are already sort of inclined to do this stuff. Luis says, I find it particularly hard to debug the current system configuration. I know that you have to use the Geeks REPL, but from that point forward, it's really underdocumented. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that at some point, if you need to debug things, you need to understand Guile a bit. Nicholas says, industry complaints about Lisps drive me insane. It's a very easy thing for people to say, I guess. Sean Doyle says, I found out that Grammarly runs on Lisp. Yeah, they do have some Lisp. That's pretty cool. Aria says Reddit used to use Lisp. Yeah, I think it was originally written in Common Lisp, and then they switched to Python probably because I don't know why they switched. Probably, you know, Lisp interpreters have sometimes can be slow, but that was a long time ago. SBCL is a lot faster, I think. John says, everyone should learn secret alien technology and benefit from its godly powers. Yes, I agree. I think you're referring to that book about Lisp, right? Benoit says, Geeks and Nix gives a lot, but are created with any level of coders in mind. You need to be able to read and write some Lisp to do that. Yep. Mason says, not really on topic, but is there a way to pin dependencies for specific projects like with Nix? There is something called inferiors, Geeks inferiors. It's a very weird name. I don't know why they call it that. But you may need to mix packages from the revision of Geeks you're currently running with packages available in a different revision of Geeks. And when they say revision of Geeks, they mean a commit at the Geeks repository, which sort of dictates what versions of packages are available to you at any given point in time. So this is something you should look at for that. Yeah, Bonk says you can use inferiors and manifests. They are definitely advanced features. I have never used inferiors before. Dustin says Rome uses Clojure. I heard that too. That's pretty cool. Clojure is definitely the outlier when it comes to people saying, oh, nobody uses Lisps in production, or nobody uses Lisps in actual business. Well, Clojure, there's a lot of people that use Clojure, and I think it's because it's, you know, there's very effective marketing for Clojure, I'll say that, but also it does have some pretty interesting properties that make it unique in the world of Lisps, like that focus on immutability and concurrency and that kind of thing. So it does have unique value, I think, to people that might make it more appropriate for use in the professional realm. Bonk says they're called inferiors because you'll use another Geeksta program, the inferior, to build a package, not your current revision. Okay, that's a good way to explain it, actually. And that's one of these concepts that I want to get through to people, which was a little bit implied by the video that I did yesterday, but I didn't really explain it. Whenever you install Geeks, you get a particular version of Geeks, but whenever you run Geeks pull, it updates the Geeks repository to the latest commit, depending on whether you have a channel pinned or whatever, and then it rebuilds Geeks. So you actually get a new copy of the Geeks binary that's up to date. So you're constantly updating Geeks every time you run Geeks pull. So what Bonk is saying here is that when you use an inferior, what you're saying is you're going back in time and pulling Geeks from an older version of Geeks to build a particular package at that same period of time with the same basically Geeks commit. So I think this is similar to what Geeks Time Machine does also. When you use Geeks Time Machine, you can give it a specific channel configuration and say, go back in time to the specific channel configuration and then build everything from that point of view, which I think is a super, super powerful part of Geeks. And when people say, I don't see what Geeks does that's different than anyone else, it's stuff like that you don't really know to look for, but it's like super, super powerful stuff. Yeah, Bonk says Geeks equals Geeks the program equals Geeks the package list. Exactly. Mark Andre says Racket Scheme is a mind-blowing language, far more powerful than Python. Racket is very cool, for sure. I haven't really spent much time with it, but it does seem very cool. Okay, Lisp is not popular or used in many places. We just talked about that, basically. Yes, that's sort of true, but it's not a reason to not use Geeks, I guess you could say. You should try to learn Scheme anyway. It's fun. I think it's fun. I think Scheme is a very nice language. I like Scheme better than Common Lisp. Just, you know, don't get too salty in the comments. Okay, other issues that people have brought up, the inertia of comfort with their current environment. So maybe you are happy with your current setup and you hear the promise of all the great things Geeks can do, but you're not really motivated to try it out. This is where I say to people, install Geeks as your package, as a secondary package manager, and try to use it for different things, and just sort of understand what it does. I guess the flip side of that is that when you install Geeks as a package manager and all you ever do is just run Geeks install some package name, you don't really understand what it's doing. You have to start trying to dig into the real features of it to really appreciate it, and then maybe even decide you want to use it for your entire system. Aniket says, another off-topic question, what is a learning curve for learning Scheme when I've learned Clojure? Well, they're very different. There's some core ideas that are similar, but they're different enough that the language semantics are different. You know, the thing I could say is that the similarities they have are mostly in terms of the basic syntax with the S expressions and parentheses and whatnot, but a lot of other things are very different. Benoit says all Lisps are fun. Yeah, Lisp is fun in general. I don't know. Even though I've benefited from plenty of other programming languages over time, I just keep coming back to Lisps as the one that are the most fun to hack with. So that's my personal preference. Glaziak says, I think improving Clojure support would be the most productive way for Geeks to gain a larger audience with the right kind of users. That is possible. If you can attract all of the Lisp enthusiast people from all the different little pockets of the community, then maybe you could make Geeks like the Uber distro for Lisp heads. So yeah, definitely, that's certainly a possibility. Okay. Another issue that people have mentioned is the heavy focus on free software. We talked about this before, where basically, you know, Geeks won't allow any proprietary or sort of like license compromised software to be added to the main repository. And the answer is still the same there. There's other places to get software for geeks. You know, you can use other package channels. Non-Geeks is a great one. And there are other new ones being created all the time. I actually heard about one today. What was it called? It was called Source Hut. Where it is, everyone. There it is. Geeks Are Us. That's what it's called. So there's another package channel I just heard about today that is being maintained. There's a lot of stuff in there. So there's all kinds of channels. That's kind of the cool part about Geeks is that anybody can create their own package channel and start making their own package definitions, service definitions, and you can pull it into your configuration and just use it. So it's kind of like a decentralized Linux distribution in that sense, where anybody can create their own set of stuff, their own repo, and tell you to use it. You can pull in your packages. I mean, there are some dangers of that, I guess you could say, you know, pull in some malicious code from somebody else, but it's up to the community to decide what the ecosystem is, because it's not just the main Geeks channel that you can get packages from. So don't be afraid of the fact that the main Geeks repo is focused only on software with free software compatible licenses and without anything proprietary. I kind of think that's a good thing because, you know, Geeks is a flagship distribution for the GNU project. It kind of has to fall into the philosophy and guidelines of the Free Software Foundation and GNU. So it makes sense, but they've given you the opportunity to pull in whatever software you want, and that's the great thing. Yes, Bonk also says something very important, and channels are not only about packages. You can add complete OS features with them too. Absolutely. So one ambition I have this year is to make my own sort of customized distribution of Geeks that has some niceties for people who watch this channel and who want to do things like use Emacs as your desktop environment, or you know, live with a more Lisp-centric lifestyle, I suppose you could say. There's many opportunities for people to come in and make customized Geeks distributions that are streamlined for certain workflows or certain types of users, and I kind of want to try that out. Bonk says Geeks Home was initially developed in a channel, if I recall. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's in the RDE channel from Andrew Turpin. Bonk seems to know a lot of things. I wonder if Bonk is involved in the Geeks project in general. Okay, so yeah, basically the answer there is package channels. Okay, so we have some nice little miscellaneous hot takes that I was seeing, mostly from the Linux subreddit where I posted the video yesterday. You know, whenever you go to the Linux subreddit, you're going to get exposed to all of the nice varieties of Linux user out in the world, and you know how Linux users can be very opinionated and salty. So, not saying that to you know, say bad things about people, but it's just, you know, it's funny. You expect this kind of thing, especially for me. I've posted a lot of stuff around the internet, and it definitely seems like, you know, people in the Linux space can be a little testy at times. So, first of all, Lisp for configs, really? It's almost like this ew Lisp kind of mentality, and that paired with I shouldn't have to learn Lisp to configure my system. So there's some people out there who really just think Lisp is stupid, and I don't know why, but in this sphere of people who like computers and software, there's a lot of really weird opinions that people have, and I've been a person who's had really weird and stupid opinions in the past as well. You know, it just sort of goes with the territory, I guess. You just sort of get set in your ways, and you think that things that are not familiar to you don't make any sense. But, you know, people were saying Lisp is not a good language for configurations. Well, I disagree completely, because Lisp is a language that's perfect for creating domain-specific languages, which is basically what Geeks configuration is. It's a domain-specific language for declarative system configuration, and now for user-level home configuration. So, it's just a misguided notion that Lisp is not good for configurations. Now, if they want to say, I don't want to use like a Lisp implementation because I hear they're slow and, you know, it uses a bunch of memory and all this stuff like that. I mean, whatever. You don't have to use it. You just don't use it, but also don't complain because it's really none of your business if it's not something that you want. Aniket says, why am I getting a Luke Smith vibe reading that? Well, there's plenty of people who are all about, you know, bloat. I disagree. Lisp is designed for creating domain-specific languages, just like Geek's own configuration language. So yeah, it's made for this. That's the whole thing. That's actually the reason why I got really interested in Lisp to begin with, is because you can create this sort of declarative syntax for a lot of things. I've been interested in game development on and off for as long as I've been programming, so a very, very long time. And when I really started to understand the value of Lisp is when I started to understand macros and the fact that you can just make whatever you want in the Lisp language with a macro. You can make whatever syntax you want for describing something. And I was like, oh, great, I can use macros to actually describe game objects in a declarative way, but it actually turns into code behind that. So you can actually interject code here and there where necessary. And that's exactly what Geeks is doing. They're creating a declarative language where you can put code in certain places, and it's both. It's both declarative and procedural to some degree. So I don't know. I think it's definitely mistaken. Marco says, hi, man. I say, life is bloat. Yeah, life could be considered to be bloat for sure. Yoshi says, Lisp is bad for configuration, and yet it's used in the most configurable editor ever. Yes, I agree with that too. Look at Emacs as an example for why this is wrong. Let's see, what else are we saying here in the chat? Raina says, I didn't know that Geeks was considered a flagship project. Does it mean that it has a similar commitment from GNU like Debian? I don't think so, but it's there are certain projects that are like Trisquel, I think. GNU Trisquel, whatever, however you pronounce that. That may be the more flagship, mainly because the FSF seems to be tweeting about Trisquel, and I give them grief for that a little bit whenever that happens. But I think that for GNU Linux distributions, in the GNU website, let's see, does it mention it somewhere? Yeah, Geeks is one of them that's mentioned, basically, GNU Linux distros. And there's a few other that I've never heard of before, like Dragora. So yeah, it is one of the sort of marquee distributions that the GNU project talks about. Valentine says, I used Geeks, now I switched to NixOS with DevOS. It's simply nicer using Flakes. I haven't tried Flakes. I don't really know what they do, but I've heard a lot of people talking about them. Gon says, fingernail clippings, Lisp versus modern noise, Perl. Yeah. Okay. So we don't need another package manager. Why are you bothering us with all these new package managers? Okay, but in the software world, where have you seen that stop anyone from making a new thing that is different or that is the same type of software than the one that already exists? It happens every day. I mean, what's the problem? I don't understand why people think we don't need a new package manager. I used what can we say? apt-get my whole life. I don't need a new package manager to do the things I need to do. Well, you haven't really paid attention then, have you? I mean, you don't understand what Geeks actually does if you say we don't need a new package manager, because what Geeks does and also what Nix does is very different than conventional package managers. It's not just downloading some piece of software off the internet and unpacking it on your file system. It's doing a lot of extra stuff that provides value. So this is just a plain misunderstanding. in my opinion, because as I showed in the video yesterday, it's not just a package manager. It's a full declarative system configuration tool. It's a isolated dev environment tool. It's a user level configuration tool. And it also does a whole lot more stuff than that I'm not even thinking of, because Geeks is like a multi-tool for systems management. So looking at it as just a package manager is incorrect. And saying we don't need another package manager is also incorrect, because you don't even take the time to think about like why it could be worthwhile to have. Let's see, what else can we say about we don't need another package manager? There are new package managers all the time. What about all the OR package managers for Arch? There's a new one every 20 days. Yeah, I mean, how many of these have you seen? Like, if you go into the Arch ecosystem, how many of these extra package managers that wrap Pacman and also do R compilation at the same time? I'm not knocking anybody who made one of those, but I'm just saying that, like, this is not something where it's a solved problem and everybody's just like happy with what's there and not going to do anything different. This is something that iterates all the time. I see Shom in the IRC saying, this is the most worked up I've ever seen David before. You know, this is a nice opportunity to add some color to the commentary. Okay, I don't see anything new here. Well, you're not paying attention, and you're not watching the video I made, and you're also not reading the documentation, because there's a lot of new stuff here. I mean, the only other place where you see anything like this is Nix, and I think that Geeks is more interesting than Nix for certain reasons, like it being a full programming language and a well-understood programming language scheme that gives you the power to do pretty much whatever you want. The model of channels in Geeks, like Bonk said earlier, you have the ability to pull in another repository to give you not only packages and services, but just any functionality you want. So one thing you don't understand, and I didn't understand until later, is that when you install a new channel into your configuration, it's actually more like you are pulling in a new code dependency that's added to your load path. So not only can it be packages and OS features and service definitions, it can also be helper code. It could be anything, really. So you could bring like a whole game engine into your Geeks configuration if you wanted to and make Pong show up on the screen. I don't know. It's not really something you would want to do, but you have to really think for a little bit about what the possibilities are when you realize that not only is the configuration code, it's also code that operates like you expect it to, and you have all opportunity open to you to do really interesting stuff. So this is, it's hard to understand what value Geeks brings to the table until you actually use it. People can tell you all day about immutable functional package management and, you know, rollbacks and all that stuff, but you really don't understand until you try it out and you see what it does differently. And you can't even try it out for 2 days. The people who try out Geeks for 2 days and say, oh, Geeks is too hard, they haven't given enough of a chance. But I can understand not sticking with it after a couple of days, because it is kind of hard to get started with. So we'll try to make it easier, or at least I will try to, you know, illuminate things to the point where it is easier to get started with Geeks, and you don't have to like scratch your head for so long to figure things out. Then, you know, try it out and see what really happens, because there's a lot that's interesting about it. It does require work on your part, though. If you don't want to have to do work, then install Ubuntu. It's fine. All right. Alejandro says Geeks is not just a package manager, but an environment configurator. Yeah, it's more than that too. It's so many things, and it's very difficult to describe what it is. I think there needs to be, I don't know if this exists, I don't know if anybody's tried to work on this, but there needs to be like an elevator pitch, like a 1 minute description of Geeks that sort of gets to the heart of what it is. So that's easier to explain to other people, because if you start talking about all the features Geeks has, people get lost. They don't understand what it means. So it's difficult to do that, I think. All right, so almost non-existent community. There was a complaint saying that there is no Geeks community. I can't find anybody. I don't know where they are. Well, then go to the website and look at where all the places are where you can talk to people about Geeks. If you go on the Geeks mailing list, you're basically going to have to unsubscribe from it because it's very busy. People talking all the time on the mailing list. There's an IRC channel where people talk. There's a System Crafters community where there's people all the time talking about geeks on Discord or even IRC. There is a community. The thing is, niche software like Geeks or Emacs, people typically figure out where the people are hanging out, and they're not in the other parts, like the general Linux community talking, oh, everybody should try Geeks, or just, going and using Geeks and being involved in the actual Geeks community. If you think there's no users, you're not looking. If there's no community, you're not looking. Another aspect of the same comment was that there's no support for a very complex system. Because there's no community, there's no support. That's not true. Go to the Geeks IRC, and the actual maintainers are there answering questions basically all day long. Now, I will say you cannot ask about every possible thing about Geeks in the Geeks IRC because of what I mentioned before. They follow the FSDG, and they cannot recommend to you to go install proprietary drivers on your system. So if you go there and ask about that, you're going to get told not to ask about it. But there is a non-Geeks channel where you can go ask about that stuff. And you can also go ask about that on the System Crafters channel as well. So maybe that's one problem people have, is that they go into the Geeks IRC chat or the mailing list and say, how do I get my NVIDIA card to work? And they basically say, don't ask me that. There needs to be a link that they can point people to that explains why, so that they can give it to a person and the person can be satisfied with the explanation and not think that people are just being jerks, because they're not really being jerks. They're just trying to uphold the requirements of the guidelines that they follow. So don't blame the people who are trying to do the right thing. Just, accept that this is the situation and understand that there's other options if you want to get help with things. Mailing lists, System Crafters community. There are plenty of places and people. Now, if you go look at the Geeks subreddit on Reddit, it doesn't have a whole lot of traffic, not a whole lot of people liking posts and stuff, which is very different than Emacs, because the Emacs subreddit is pretty busy and a lot of people interacting there. You should not look at the Geeks subreddit as an indicator of the health of the community, because I think people are hanging out in other places instead. Let's see, what am I missing here in the chat? Valentine says, if I recall, Geeks also had worse error messages in comparison to Nix. Yes, it definitely, I mean, I don't know about Nix specifically, but sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm scrolling the chat and I get distracted by other nice things. Oh yeah, error messages. There are times when the error messages have been sorely lacking in Geeks for sure. Bonk says, one thing that can put off newcomers, though, is presentation. No shiny Git forwards with issues, IRC mail only, dry GNU documentation. I agree 100%. The signals that people usually used to determine the health and popularity of a project are not the same for Geeks as they are for the typical Linux distribution or popular program that you find. You're not going to find Geeks on GitHub with 10,000 stars on the repo and a bunch of issues where people are asking questions. You're gonna have to go look for the old school email driven approach and IRC to find where the people are hanging out. And because there's no thumbs up on everything, you can't really tell how popular Geeks is because you're not getting that signal. And to be honest with you, that's actually one of my complaints about SourceHut. And Drew DeVault is vocally against the idea of having stars and other signals like that on repositories. And I can understand why he is, but at the same time, people have gotten so used to using these signals to understand whether a project is worth trying that they will just overlook something if they can't get any information about whether people are using it. And on SourceHut, you do have that problem. Same as you have with the GNU Savannah website or the mailing list on Mailman and all that. You don't get any indication other than just number of posts, and people typically don't even want to look at a Mailman page because it looks so antiquated. SourceHut doesn't really have that problem because it has a better interface, but it's harder to find all the stuff because the the UI of the site is so like spread apart. So I think that we live in a world where like buttons dominate the psychology of how you interpret what you're reading on the internet. And that's a bad thing. But if you don't have that, then there's a certain section of people who are just going to completely look away. But maybe that's fine. You know, like a person like Drew is very happy to just basically ignore a large part of the population because he doesn't care about what they want or need. So there's multiple sides to that argument, and I think that's definitely a contribution. I agree with Bonk completely about that this is part of what is making it harder for people to think that there's actually a community or any popularity or interest in geeks. Checking the chat again. Wind Up Boy says the GNU insistence on the email patch workflow for development is a real problem. I like it from the perspective that you can use whatever tools that you want to use to interact with the project. So IRC and Mail are very well supported in Emacs, and it makes it easier for you to be in Emacs, not have to use some other program just to interact with the project. But that's about the place where I stop liking it, because then it's a higher barrier to entry to certain people. It is harder for sure. Alexandru says, I think it would be cool if geeks would move to SourceHut. The Emacs folk were testing SourceHut about a week ago. SourceHut would be an improvement compared to Savannah, for sure, because Savannah is like the worst web interface. It's straight out of 2005. It probably was written in 2005. I don't know. And when you go there, I feel like I'm seeing tumbleweeds go across the screen. Like it's like a ghost town, because there's really no sense of activity there at all, even though you can actually find the repository for geeks and other GNU projects there. It just seems so dead. Even though it was meant to be a forge like SourceForge, etc. So going to SourceHut instead is definitely one way for it to have some chance of having a pulse on the internet. But still, I think that SourceHut needs to potentially rethink a couple of the user interface decisions. You know, you don't need likes, but you at least need a way for it to be more clear about how to get to the various aspects of a project. That whole navigation bar at the top is very obtuse, in my opinion. Got some good questions here that I can't answer, like Ed's question. Can you speak briefly to the differences between geeks and something like OS Tree? I don't really know as much about that. Someone else may be able to answer that question. All right, I'm missing a lot of chat. Unfortunately, I would like to be able to read it all, but we've got like 5 minutes left and I got to finish this. So we're on the last one anyway. I don't like the big abstraction layer on top of the Linux system. So there's somebody who takes issue with the fact that you've got basically a advanced program that is in between you and the files on your Linux system. But that's the whole point. You don't want to be messing with the etc files or the user lib directory all day long. You don't want to be setting your LD library path, your library path, or your include path all the time for different programs. You just want to be able to install a configuration and have it be set up completely end to end without you having to go and do all that stuff manually again. For me, the benefit of Geeks is that I don't have to think about etc. existing anymore. I don't have to think about any of that stuff existing anymore, which, okay, sure. You know, Unix is sort of designed to have a specific file system structure to make it effective for gathering information about the system, but configuration files, I don't really care that much about those in most cases. And if I have a higher level abstraction that can just say, here are the salient things you might want to configure about this package or this service, and then let me fill those in, and then it takes care of the rest, then I'm much happier, to be honest. So not only does that abstraction layer give you the ability to not think about what's in your configuration files for every single program that you use, it also gives you the ability to do rollbacks or having isolated profiles where you have different sets of programs installed or different versions of the libraries or whatever. There's so many aspects of this that are actually important that if you just say, oh, it's just too much of a thick abstraction layer on top, then okay, fine, go use Slackware. You know, it's fine. Just use like go build Linux from scratch and use it yourself if you want to do that. That's totally fine. But you got to see there's value to what's being added there in that thick layer of Guile scheme code. People don't come and use this project because they just want to, you know, let Guile chew on package definitions all day. There's actual value to be had. All right, so and, you know, it is complex because you're basically working on an actual program that knows how to apply system configurations and install packages and all kinds of, you know, fun and interesting things. But the other aspect that's also very interesting is all that stuff is exposed to you. You have the ability to just go into the code and see how everything works and change it yourself, replace parts of it if you want to, replace a lot of it if you want to. If you wanted to use a completely different way that you know, services are, well, if you don't like how the typical desktop environment setup is done on Geeks, you can rip it out and replace it with anything else. You can go down to the lowest levels of what is set up in the system and build up from scratch if you want to. You have full control. Sure, you have full control too if you have just a plain Linux system that follows the normal Linux file system approach. But you know, that's not as repeatable. You have to write a bunch of bash scripts to do the same thing that Geeks can do for you. Wind Up Boy says, environmental repeatability is a huge win. Yes, it is, especially if you're trying to use the same workflow on multiple computers. For me, I'm using like 3 different computers on a regular basis, and I have my configuration replicated between them, and it's easy for whenever I go to one of the other computers I haven't used for a while, I just go sync my dot files, I update Geeks, and then I reapply my configuration both for system level and user level. And then 9 times out of 10, I'm perfectly up to date with what I've been doing on my other machines. You can't do that with Arch Linux very easily because you have to go and remember what configuration files you set up in your root file system. Like if you made any tweaks to any programs, or if you had to drop in any like random libraries or anything special you had to do to make a particular program work. It is harder to write a package for Geeks when you have to do that kind of thing, but the whole point is that you do it once. You figure out how to write it once, and then you're able to reproduce that in other places. So it's like writing a script, but it's better because you have a whole framework to help you with it. So anyway, I think that was the whole set of things, and you know, you get a whole lot of opinions and takes from me on whether any of this stuff makes sense at all. Let's see. Did it take everything that I wrote there? Good. So hopefully that was useful to those of you who had concerns about Geeks, or you know, had common problems with Geeks and didn't really know how to deal with them. You know, this is sort of just an opportunity for us to talk about it together, since I asked those questions in the video yesterday. But a lot of this stuff we're going to go into more depth on videos in the channel this year. To me, 2022 is the year of Geeks, in the sense that my primary focus on this channel will be evangelizing Geeks and teaching people how to use it correctly and how to understand it, and you know, to be able to be effective at writing code that integrates with Geeks, you know, package configurations, everything else, because I love it. I think it's great, and I want the community to grow so that we can speed up the process of getting new contributions in terms of packages, services, etc. And also, I want more people to come help contribute to projects that I have that I'm going to be working on, which we'll be talking about pretty soon. So this is sort of like a way for me to market it to you so that you can come join me in using Geeks and also join the Geeks community as well. So I hope that was useful and interesting to all of you. I'm going to check the chat one last time, and then we'll jump off the stream for the day. You know, it's nice when there's a lot of people here and a lot of people chatting, because it's harder for me to follow it. That's a good thing, actually. I like that. Andrew says, yeah, Geeks reproducibility is ultimate. Yes, indeed. And Bonk says, a new release, surely 1.4, is in the works for the next month or so. Yes, there's a lot of stuff that just got merged recently. And one of the things I didn't talk about is the new changes to the packaging format to make it simpler and easier to understand. That's going to have a big effect too, I think. And if you don't know about it, they had to update a ton of packages in Geeks to respond to those changes. So there was like a branch that was going on for a long time with a lot of new software that was being updated that wasn't actually going into the main Geeks master branch. So a lot of stuff just dropped, a lot of new package improvements and everything else. So yeah, it seems like 1.4 is definitely coming soon, which is great because we'll have the beginnings of Geeks Home and Geeks Shell all in a full release, which is good. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here today. I really appreciate all the interaction in the chat. Let me know in the comments if you're watching a recording what you think about all of this. And also let me know what you're looking forward to in terms of Geeks content this year and how I might be able to help you. And if you need help in general about Geeks, definitely go to the places that I mentioned before, the Geeks IRC channel, the mailing lists, and also if you follow the link in the description to systemcrafters.chat, it gives you the details on, well, actually that's not gonna work because the wiki's down. There's other links, I think, in the description for how to get the Discord. If you can't find that, I'll fix the wiki. You can go to System Crafters chat. I'll fix the wiki in the next couple days. Anyway, definitely come find us online in Discord and IRC because we're happy to talk to you about Geeks. So anyway, thank you all so much for being here today. I hope you all have a great weekend. And next week, like I said, be on the lookout for that video about Vertigo extensions. Until next time, happy hacking. See ya.